Hello, I'm Sam, and welcome to the development of Mystical Path, my final project. What is Mystical Path? Mystical Path is a fantasy insect forest made in Unreal to be just have renders and a nice video and have some animations, and it's just to develop my forest skills, my nature modeling skills, and to just improve my UV mapping workflow and my overall composition and ambience for video games. It was originally supposed to be a walkable level, but just became renders as time went on, as I found that a walkable level was not appropriate for the time frame. My inspiration for the project were the Genshin, Studio Ghibli, Sea of Stars, Ori, Hollow Knight, and Ni no Kuni, all very stylized work. Even though A Sea of Stars is a pixel game, I used it to inspire my terrain, and I wanted all my environment to look similar to that, as it's very stylized. But my main inspiration was Genshin and Ori in the Blind Forest. The initial plan was to have the planning in October, model in UV through November, December, and have everything else finished for the rest of the year, but this was not accurate. In fact, modeling went on pretty much throughout the entire project, as I just kind of modeled and textured as I went along rather than doing modeling first and then texturing. Here on screen you see basic asset list. We got big tree, normal trees, bushes and everything. This is what I planned to create, and this is what I did end up creating. Here's the overall Gantt chart. Sorry, it's quite small. There will be a link to the actual Gantt chart in the project files. It should be on there if you want to have a complete depth look. But that is the overall plan. Initial sketches, I just wanted to create like a portal and include some crystals and trees and stuff. And so I just kind of created some basic ideas. In my actual project, ended up combining quite a few of these ideas with the big crystal over here with the lake. But then I included this crystal base with some rocks and decided to scrap the vents later on. But I liked this background area as well, so that is what we set out to achieve in the project. Start off, I just blocked out 3ds Max just to make it a lot easier. This was kind of just a basic idea of what the plan would look like. Then I blocked it out in Unreal, just using basic shapes. Also added the waterfall in there, just had some visual interest. And later on, this does develop as I go. So to start with the landscape, I created a procedural landscape environment that you could use by just painting the landscape. It paints the grass and the rocks for you, so then you just have to input the textures and then you just build your own terrain and it does it for you, makes it a lot easier. And as well as that, I did create some procedural grass to go along with it. The grass I did set out to make it quite stylized so it fit in the environment quite well. The grass was kind of how set the art style for the whole project, so I just created it to be quite basic as there was a lot of grass. And it started off as just basic shapes, changed basic colours, and then I tweaked it to make it look cohesive for the aesthetic. And so after that, I just created a basic composition using basic shapes. So in the first one, all the light is going towards the waterfall. In the second one, you can't see the waterfall, it's just showing the light. And after some feedback, I did try to develop this sort of composition with the light showing this, just because it drags your eyes along the whole scene, just to make it look a little bit more cohesive and a little more artistically accurate and just more interesting overall. So after that, I decided to change all the textures for the landscape, as this would set the art style as a whole. So got basic grass and some rocks with dirt and some twigs. This was all created in Substance Designer, just using some basic tutorials, but then just tweaking it to be my own. So following someone else, but also not really following someone else. It's just kind of taking the ideas that they give me and then putting it into my own work and just kind of creating my own thing using the nodes and ideas that they give me. From that, I painted it onto the landscape to make it look like this, and used the smoothing tool and the flatten tool in the landscape to make it very stylized and make it less less large and chunky and more detailed little flat layers, and just make it a little bit more interesting visually. And after that, I created some plants, like some flowers to go in there. This is the wireframe for these, but they're all pretty similar, and they're just flat planes, modeled to be shaped, and then the textures are painted on to make it look like flowers. So there's some different types and different colors, just to have some variation. And this is what the environment looked like after painting all the flowers in here. There's probably too many here, but it came along eventually just to include the flowers in the scene and see what it looked like as a whole. And after that, I changed the lighting of the scene, changed the shader of the water, but that eventually changed anyway. And here we've got a basic bush, just again using the same techniques as the plants, just by having different coloured layers, flattening them out, and just putting it all together in 3ds Max just to make it seem a little bit more interesting for the environment, instead of just having flowers, having some bushes as well. Here there's a similar plant, just 2 flat layers put together to make a taller plant, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So here I was working on the composition with the lighting, just to see what the new, the trees and the new flowers look like. Toned down all the flowers a little bit, just to make it, less in your face as a whole. Just calm the flowers down through the environment, just to make it look more interesting, and just scatter them around instead of having it all up in there, so it's not too much for you to look at. After that, I decided to retexture the bush and the plant. The first ones were just very flat, not very interesting, and made a lily pad. So I just retextured them all in Photoshop, just hand painted all the textures. And then from there, I made a gravelly texture and a transition shade here for the grass. So this just makes the environment look a little bit more detailed rather than having 2 colours. We've got 4, and the gravel there for the water works quite well, and the transition shade just helps the grass feel like it's natural with the dirt. And then I decided to revamp the portal, as this was the main focus of the environment. So I took the basic model that I made, built it up a little bit, added a vine to make it look incorporated with the trees, and then I thought it's not as interesting as it could be, so I added more detail, flattened the bottom instead of making this part detailed, made it more detailed at the top. And then I painted it in ZBrush, just using some trim tools and the Dam Standard tool to just make it a little bit more broken down, a little bit worn. And then I painted it in Substance Painter, using a concrete and some levels with some colours to make it more interesting. So we've got colour, we've got normal map, we've got roughness map. We don't have a metallic map though, as it is stone, it doesn't need a metallic, but all the other textures are there to make it feel a little bit more somewhat realistic, but also stylized in the way that it needs to be for the project. After that, working on the vines and making some large roots for the trees, just to keep it, I wanted to make it feel like the tree was growing into the environment, going into the portal, to just make it look like it's interesting, and also just make it all like cohesive, make it look like it's worn down. It just makes it look like that, whoever made all this stuff has not been there in a long time. So the vine here is it's less of a vine, more like a larger root, and these roots were also made. They were just basic modeled in 3ds Max, and then painted, and it was sculpted in ZBrush and then painted in Substance Painter to give it this wood sort of look. The rocks, I originally set out to make quite a lot of rocks, like 9 or 10 rocks, but I ended up only creating 3, just because in the end it didn't really matter. The rocks were not as visible as you might think. like I made a flat rock for the pathways, and then two lots of big rocks. There's a big rock with a moss, and normal rock with no moss. It just keeps it like a little bit more interesting, but also I didn't need to make as many as I set out just because no one's going to be looking too deep into the rocks. They're just there to add a little bit more visual interest to the pond and also the layers of the environment. Here I made a big crystal with a big crystal stand here, and also made some pillars. These pillars were sculpted in ZBrush again, and then painted in Painter. The crystal texture was a tutorial that I followed. It includes it just tells you how to make the layers of the crystal. So I created a couple different crystal versions, one with deeper levels and one less deeper levels. And I also changed some of the colours up to make it a little bit more interesting. But it's got that emission, it's got that like depth to it. Just makes it look more realistic despite being stylized. It just brings it all together, especially with the pillars. So then I had to create the trees because I waited a little bit too long on the trees and they just needed to be done. So I've made two different trees. They're both very similar. They've just got different branches here, different shapes. And from that, I just created the leaves separately so I could paint. So not only could they attach them to the trees to keep some structure to it, I also created the leaves separate so that I could paint them with foliage, so then it's not running as strong on my computer and also not running as strong in the background, making it not lag as much. So I kept the leaves shaped, for the front part where I need them to be very specific, but also made them in a way that I could paint them and just make them shown in the background where it doesn't need to be as specific. From there, I worked on the lighting and the fog just to showcase, what I needed to do next, work on the composition. First I added the fog, then I worked on the lighting, and then I just changed all the colours and really deepened that lighting to focus on that portal. Here's a big plant, just to add a little bit more depth to this environment. So I just got a trunk part that was painted, and then I've just got the leaves that were drawn in Photoshop, and they were just put together in 3ds Max and pasted here into a big plant. Mushrooms, again the same procedure, low poly to high poly procedure. So we've got the low poly mushrooms into the ZBrush model, into the texture, and then these were pasted into emission onto the texture so that they could glow. So I put them around in the background here to just add a little bit more interest to that waterfall area, but also keep the flow of the glow all around the environment. Here I worked on the particle effects, so here we've got the waterfall, foam coming up, and here we've also got the fireflies to also incorporate that insect vibe we got going on. So here all the particles are animated, so we've got the fireflies flying around, and the waterfall. These were all Niagara systems. I also followed tutorials for these, but also changed them in my own way, just to make it a little bit more visually appealing for the work, just to make it a little more interesting. Here I worked on the portal particles, again another tutorial, but I changed all the colours and changed the lengths and everything to keep the portal more interesting as a whole, because the original crystal texture just didn't bring out that portal as strong as I want it to be. So then I moved it to this portal particles, which does also animate, to bring all of the animations together in the actual project. Lunar Moth, just painted using a reference. I just painted it in Photoshop and then put it on a plane and moved the points of the plane to create this little moth, just to add a little bit more interest in the background of the trees. So here were the renders that I put up for my final presentation that I did in class. As you can see, the portal's strong, but the waterfall in the background was stronger, and the the mushrooms were too strong, and also we noticed that the crystal was just a little bit too big. Although the color is quite good, it's just a little bit too big for the project. So here are the improvements I made. I made the crystal smaller just to make it, not as strong in the environment. Changed the mushroom so there's 3 different layers of color. There's a bright, there's a medium, and a really dark. And then for the waterfall, I changed the color from black to blue, and then changed the UV so it's more stretched to make it look like it's falling down. So here are the renders to look at these improvements. And these are all the final renders that I created for this project. Positives and negatives. So for the positives of this project, I created a portfolio piece that I was proud of. I am very happy with this project. Although some of it didn't go to plan, it's still something I can be proud of. I improved my organic modeling skills and my stylized texturing, and I kept to the art style, which is something I struggled with in my last project. And I also learned the quirks of Unreal, working with the different materials and Niagara, and just working with some new effects that I didn't work with before. The negatives are time management didn't go as well as I would hoped. I'm not very good at time management. It was never going to be fixed in one project. Although I did try, some things just had to be cut, some things had to be shortened, and I didn't really put as much work into the project that I wanted to. But as I know for next time that I can put a lot more into the project, and just my compositional skills are just not as effective. I need to work on my composition, and again, something that I couldn't fix just through one project, but I did try through the end through the improvements and the feedback that I did get. And here is the video. Apologies for the buffering, my internet's not too good. But as you can see, you get the point. There is a video on YouTube I'll send you a link to. And overall, that is my project. And I really do hope you enjoy my project. I am proud of it, and I will see you at some point.